Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Cary Grant, The Making of a Hollywood Legend, by Mark Glancy, narrated by Daniel Henning. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to visual elements present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Foreword. Since Plutarch, cultural biography has too often lent itself to the extremes of hagiography and demonization. Biography not as fact-based narrative with a critical point of view, but as testimony of slavish devotion or blunt disdain. A particularly toxic mode of disdain, fueled by gossip and amplified by outrage, focuses on artists once regarded with veneration and later found to be imperfect. Cary Grant was among those who got it in the neck. Some of the early accounts of his life were so intent on portraying a bitterly disturbed and miserly closet case that those unfamiliar with his uniquely creative luminosity on screen, if any exist, might wonder why he merited a full-dress biography at all. Mark Glancy puts artist and art in perspective and finds much to admire in both. Grant was born for the screen. One suspects he would have been assuming, but diminished on stage. Of course, he came from the stage, but significantly not the stage of Shakespeare and Shaw. Rather, like Keaton and Chaplin, he served his apprenticeship in variety, the theater of pratfalls, sketches, blackouts, beer-drinking songs, and stilt-walking, the last his specialty when he toured under his birth name, Archie Leach. He remade himself on screen, mastering the tools of the more intimate medium, including the close-up, the mutable mise-en-scène on which to impose his graceful angularity, and the microphone, which caught the nuances of his much-imitated but finally inimitable voice. "Nobody talks like that," the Jack Lemmon character challenges the Tony Curtis character, who does a spot-on Grant impression in Some Like It Hot, invariably getting a raucous laugh because no one did speak like that during Prohibition, when that film takes place, or after, except for Cary Grant. In Cary Grant, The Making of a Hollywood Legend, Glancy examines his accent as a fusion of Bristol, where he was born, and Brixton, where he worked, with his methodical attempt to sound American, resulting in an agile mid-Atlantic concoction entirely sui generis. Glancy, a British film historian who has focused on the cinematic connections between two countries separated by a common language, gives us a thorough and knowing account of his life and career, not least the difficult years of his childhood. Even Freud might have blanched at the Oedipal snags arising from his father telling young Archie that his mother was dead, when in fact he committed her to a mental asylum 3 miles away so that he could live with another woman. One primary research source was the 39 linear feet of boxes filled with papers that Grant had amassed and preserved for posterity's sake. They were available to previous biographers who evidently perused them superficially or not at all. Glancy excels in detailing the extraordinary discipline with which Grant averted a bleak future to make himself into one of the most adored figures of his time, a character as solidly imagined as any fictional prototype, but with a twist. He remained flexible enough to prevail for 3 decades as a resourceful actor while retaining an essential, consistent core that justified his much-quoted quip, "Everybody wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant." The transformation of Archie into Cary involved years of dedication. In examining each of 72 films that Grant made in 34 years, he left the business at the height of his popularity at age 62, Glancy provides an enlightening step-by-step account of the intelligence and effort required to mount a career in the studio era. Learning how to act for the camera was relatively straightforward compared to achieving and holding on to stardom. Grant's masters at Paramount, the first studio to take him on, saw him merely as a tall, handsome fellow with a snazzy wardrobe who could squire its leading ladies if Gary Cooper or Frederick March weren't available. Apparently, not even Mae West, who plucked him from obscurity for 2 pictures, saw how funny he could be. Grant studied filmmaking and film acting assiduously, and after his 1937 breakthrough in The Awful Truth, he worked even harder to show his diversity and maintain his place as a box office favorite. He read countless scripts, prevaricating over his choices, demanding rewrites, selecting co-stars and directors, managing the business end as well as, or better than his agent, all the while respecting the expectations of a growing audience. He made it all look so easy. That was part of the genius of Cary Grant. Everything looked easy, even climbing Mount Rushmore while ducking bullets. He proved that one could do almost anything in a smartly tailored tuxedo, and that, gray hairs notwithstanding, there would always be a 20-something beauty to chase after him. Glancy does not paper over Grant's failings. He could be rude, shifty, disaffected, fickle, and even a cad. On first meeting Sophia Loren, with whom he soon fell in love, he asked, "How do you do, Miss Lola Loren? Or is it Miss Laurenigida?" He made mistakes in romance and in assessing his work. He tried to get out of The Awful Truth, which established his persona and stardom, and complained angrily that North by Northwest, which canonized both, was an incomprehensible mess. Until he saw the finished film and salaamed his apologies to its director, Alfred Hitchcock, whose favorite actor Grant was. Mark Glancy does full justice to a complex man and his abiding art, which looks so effortless, any one of us could do it in our dreams. Gary Giddens, Series Editor. Introduction. "I definitely don't trust biographies," Cary Grant said in 1984. "I've had some hatchet jobs done on me." He was speaking on stage and in his one-man show, A Conversation with Cary Grant. Although he had retired from the screen 2 decades earlier, audiences were thrilled to be in the presence of this legendary Hollywood star, and he relished the opportunity to speak directly to his fans, setting the record straight and telling his own story. Of course, the evening included a reel of clips from some of his best-known films. Always a romantic leading man, these showed him in intimate situations with 3 generations of leading ladies, including Marlene Dietrich, Irene Dunne, Katharine Hepburn, Ingrid Bergman, Grace Kelly, Deborah Kerr, Eva Marie Saint, and Audrey Hepburn. Often a clown, they also showed him falling on his face, performing cartwheels and getting slapped, sprayed, tripped up, and tickled by these same co-stars. For most of the evening, though, he took questions about his personal and professional life and offered frank answers with his characteristic charm and humor. His distrust of biographies was fed by a steady stream of unauthorized accounts of his life. 6 of these books were published in his lifetime, most of them insisting that although he personified effortless elegance, grace, and good manners on screen, he was actually a deeply flawed and unhappy man off-screen. "They're all absolute nonsense," he commented. He knew that there would be worse to come after his death when libel laws would no longer protect him. He was appalled to see this happen to others of his generation, including his friend Alfred Hitchcock. Hence, he told his wife Barbara and his daughter Jennifer to brace themselves for the onslaught of books and articles that would be published after his death, telling his life story in the most unflattering terms. He was right to warn them. All too often, biographies of Cary Grant have taken the form of exposés, with gossip, hearsay, and invention serving as their primary sources. Long before he died, he developed his own form of defense against the lies and misconceptions that were written about him. He had a fireproof vault built into his home in Beverly Hills, a steel-reinforced walk-in vault of a kind normally used by banks or jewelers. He had no intention of storing cash or jewels in this room-sized safe. Instead, he filled the drawers and lined the shelves with memorabilia from every stage of his life. Many of the items are personal. his teenage diary, letters from his mother and father, birth and marriage certificates, and photographs document his childhood in Bristol, England. Many more concern his long and surprisingly varied career in show business, scrapbooks, scripts, correspondence, and contracts that document his years in music hall and vaudeville, on the Broadway stage, and his 4 decades in Hollywood. The vault served as his own personal archive, and one filled with material that reveals the real circumstances, challenges, and achievements of his extraordinary life. There were practical reasons for installing the vault. During the Second World War, many of his British friends and members of his family lost their homes during the Blitz on Bristol, and the bombs destroyed their photographs and mementos as well as their houses. He was determined to protect his own past from California's wildfires and mudslides. There is no doubt, however, that he was also creating his own archive. He saved not only the letters he received, but carbon copies of the replies he sent, and when he clipped articles about his life and career from newspapers and magazines, he wrote corrective notes in the margins. "Nonsense" was a frequent entry, or attached a typed sheet to them, listing their inaccuracies before filing the articles away. Even in retirement, he was a steadfast archivist, meticulously saving his press clippings and correspondence. There were also more personal reasons for creating the archive. At the end of his life, he was an extraordinarily wealthy man, living very near the top of Beverly Hills in a house that had views stretching from downtown Los Angeles to the Pacific Ocean. Yet the fame and fortune he achieved as a film star and his debonair screen image masked his origins as Archie Leach, a working-class Bristol boy who endured an unusually tough childhood and a long struggle to establish himself in show business. The memorabilia that he put in the vault connected one side of his life with the other, documenting the long process through which Archie Leach became Cary Grant. After his death, Barbara Grant donated the contents of the vault to the Margaret Herrick Library in Beverly Hills. The Cary Grant Papers, as the collection is now known, consists of 39 linear feet of boxes containing documents, photographs, and ephemera from every period of his professional and personal life. The Cary Grant Papers are the starting point for this book. When I first looked through the papers, I was astonished by what I found, not only because the collection illuminates so many aspects of his life that are murky or misunderstood, but also because it is clear that previous biographers made little, if any, use of them. I went through the collection systematically and convinced that they offered scope for a much more substantive, fully sourced biography. I went on to conduct further research in a range of other archives. The Bristol City Records Office was a particularly important source of information about his family and his childhood, while film industry archives offered extensive information about his film career, including the records of film studios, MGM, Paramount, RKO, 20th Century Fox, and Warner Brothers, and the papers of directors, George Cukor, Alfred Hitchcock, George Stevens, and producers, Arthur Freed, Hal Roach, Jerry Wald, who played an important role in his career. In the midst of this research, I contributed to the documentary Becoming Cary Grant, and in that capacity, I was able to view hours of his home movies, filmed mainly in the 1930s and 1940s, and thus to see the world through his eyes, or at least his lens. Throughout this research, my aim has been to write neither an exposé nor an uncritical celebration of Cary Grant's life and career. Rather, I want to tell a more intimate, sympathetic, and accurate account of how Archie Leach became Cary Grant, and how Cary Grant sustained his success and reputation across many decades. On screen, his ability to embody a host of seemingly contradictory qualities, that is, to be both British and American, working class and upper class, masculine and feminine, elegant and comical, lies at the core of his appeal across many decades, but it is important to consider, too, how he tailored his image to specific moments, contexts, and film genres. He first emerged as a distinctive and popular film star in the zaniest of Depression-era screwball comedies, The Awful Truth, and he made this genre his own over the next few years with films such as Bringing Up Baby, His Girl Friday, and The Philadelphia Story. Yet the screen persona he created was pliable enough to suit the tearjerker Penny Serenade, the war drama Destination Tokyo, the gothic thriller Notorious, the lush romantic melodramas An Affair to Remember and Indiscreet, and the stylish spy stories North by Northwest and Charade. His distinctive screen image did not fully emerge until he was in his 30s, but it was nevertheless informed by his troubled childhood in Bristol. One of the most poignant aspects of my research has been exploring his relationship with his mother. It is now well known that Archie Leach was committed to the Bristol lunatic asylum when he was a boy, that he did not see her again for nearly 20 years. However, reading her medical records, her many letters to her son, and other family documents allows me to shed new light on the circumstances of her commitment to the asylum, the impact that this had on him, and the struggle that mother and son went through to rebuild their relationship years later. The long journey that Archie Leach made from Bristol to Hollywood, beginning when he ran away from home to join an acrobatic troupe at the age of 14, and ending when he made his first film at the age of 28, is another fascinating dimension to this story. He left Bristol without finishing school and with no professional training of any kind, yet he remade himself as the most debonair of men on the screen. Exploring this transformation is a key part of the story that is told here, with emphasis on the questions of how and when he developed the accent, manners, grooming, and performance skills of a star who came to define worldly sophistication. Throughout much of his film career, Cary Grant was considered a delightful entertainer, but also a star who simply played himself on screen. It was only after he retired, and presumably because he was so missed once he stopped making new films, that he began to be recognized as an incomparable talent. 10 years after his retirement, this reassessment was driven by two of the most esteemed American film critics. Pauline Kael's lengthy analysis of his career, The Man from Dream City, was published in the venerable New Yorker, while David Thompson's declaration that he was the best and most important actor in the history of cinema was made in his highly regarded Biographical Dictionary of Film. Subsequent appraisals of his talent have often assumed that his trademarks as a performer, an athletic grace and precision, stemmed from his teenage training as a music hall acrobat. But anyone who has seen his earliest films can observe that the transition from stage to screen was not a straightforward one for him. He was an uncertain actor initially, and he learned his craft through dedication and careful scrutiny of his own performances. His dedication ultimately enabled him to make some of the best-known films of the 20th century and to work with some of Hollywood's greatest directors. One of the pleasures of writing this book has been investigating the making of his classic films, as well as his near misses and total flops. It is fascinating to see the new perspectives that directors such as George Cukor, Leo McCarey, Howard Hawks, George Stevens, and Alfred Hitchcock brought to the Cary Grant screen persona, as well as his own contributions to the films he made with these and other directors. From the late 1930s onward, he was usually involved in every step of the filmmaking process, from scripting to casting to editing. He brought a fastidious perfectionism to inspecting sets and costumes and everything else that appeared on screen. In Hollywood's studio era, it was very unusual for a star to have the control, power, and influence that Cary Grant enjoyed. But he was a trailblazer, breaking down barriers by becoming a freelance star in 1937 and asserting his authority thereafter. He inspired many other stars to follow his example. As the title of this book indicates, I'm interested in every aspect of the making of this Hollywood legend. This includes his private life, how it was reported, to what extent the reports were true or false, and how it has been remembered. Here, I must declare my stance on an issue that has proved to be remarkably contentious. Biographies of Cary Grant can be divided between those that take for granted that he was heterosexual and those that insist that he was a closeted gay man whose most important romantic relationships were with male partners. I approached this issue with an open mind, but I've not found any evidence to support the idea that he was secretly gay. He married 5 times, and when he was not married to a woman, he was usually romantically attached to one. Several of his wives and girlfriends have attested to his sexual interest in women and dismissed the rumors about him, not least his 3rd wife, Betsy Drake. "Why would I believe Cary was homosexual?" Drake asked, "when we were busy fucking?" No biographer can prove or disprove all aspects of their subject's sexuality, and it is impossible for me to say whether or not Cary Grant had any attraction to or sexual experiences with men. However, I can make the case that he was predominantly, and enthusiastically, heterosexual, and I can offer a new perspective on how and why rumors about his sexuality developed and intensified over the years. Chronicling the making of a legend entails acknowledging early byways and dead ends on the road to creating and sustaining his most distinctive and attractive persona. "Everybody wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant," he famously said. It is a characteristically self-deprecating statement, and one that belies the fact that Cary Grant was the careful, determined invention of a man born as Archie Leach. My starting point is that his invention was a work of genius, the product of decades of determined hard work, and it deserves a faithful, reliable accounting. Part 1. Archie Leach, 1904 to 1927. 1. Cary Grant's very first memory was of his mother bathing him in a portable enamel bathtub in front of the fire at his grandmother's house, and feeling ashamed of being put on naked display in that way. He was, he recalled, a squirming mass of protesting flesh, as he was dunked and washed. Ironically, the films he made decades later often used similar scenes for comedy. He would be robbed of his clothes while showering, or made to shower in his clothes, or in icy water, all situations that provoked howls of protest and whinnies of frustration from the otherwise debonair, well-mannered characters he played. His earliest memory, however, had no comedy. It served as a reminder that, although on screen he came to personify 20th century affluence and sophistication, he was born into a world that had not yet fully emerged from the Victorian era. His recollections of his childhood in Bristol, England, highlight the privations of working life in the early 1900s. Bristol had long been a prosperous port city. Situated in the southwest of England, on the River Avon, it was an embarkation point for exploring the Americas in the 15th century. In the centuries that followed, it became a major port for slaves and tobacco, trades that brought wealth to the city. Sometimes termed the San Francisco of Britain, Bristol is a picturesque city built on steep hills affording wide views, and its wealthiest neighborhood, Clifton, had streets lined with elegant Regency terraces. The stunning Clifton Suspension Bridge, spanning the Avon Gorge, is not as vast as Golden Gate Bridge, but it has a majesty all its own. Most of Bristol's population did not live in Clifton, of course, but in the more crowded working-class districts closer to the city center. At the beginning of the 20th century, Bristol grew rapidly. The population leaped from 222,000 in 1891 to 357,000 in 1911, and it became a thriving center for manufacturing and trade. New streets were springing up along Gloucester Road, the high street that extends northward out of the city, with houses built for the city's working classes. Cary Grant's first home was in one of these new streets near Gloucester Road. The grey stone terraced house at 8 Hughenden Road, now renumbered as number 15, was one of 20 small, identical houses built at the turn of the century on what used to be farmland in Horfield, a parish previously separate from but now incorporated into Bristol's expanding boundaries. Like all of the streets in this working-class district of the city, Hughenden Road is a narrow street with tightly packed-together terraced houses, but because it was built at the very edge of the expanding city, back in 1904, there were fields and open spaces just beyond it, some still remaining today as Horfield Common. This house was, in his memory, only one step ahead of freezing, because it was heated only by small fireplaces, in which coal fires were lit sparingly. There was no electricity, and thus no refrigerator or washing machine. Baths were taken in portable tubs brought into the kitchen specially for the occasion and filled with water by hand. Toilets were outside in the privy, just beyond the back door, and chamber pots were kept under the bed for nighttime relief. Clothing and shoes were tended with care as they were expensive and difficult to clean. Most children left school at the age of 12 or very shortly thereafter to begin a lifetime of work. There was no radio or television, and a weekly trip to the music hall or the cinema was a treat relished by many. Archie was born at home, as most babies were at the time, and he arrived in the early morning hours of January 18, 1904. His parents, Elias and Elsie Leach, named him Archibald Alec Leach. They'd been married nearly 6 years earlier on May 30th, 1898, in a church, St. Matthias on the Wear, in central Bristol. What young Archie did not know, and Cary Grant would find out only in middle age, was that he was his parents' second child. Their first, John William Elias Leach, was born 5 years before him and just 9 months after his parents' marriage. When the firstborn baby was just 11 months old, he became ill. Some accounts say that Elsie accidentally shut a door on his tiny finger, which then became infected. Other accounts, including the baby's death certificate, say that he died from convulsions arising from tubercular meningitis. All accounts agree that Elsie was sick with worry during his illness and that she sat beside his cot night and day, without sleep, until a doctor ordered her to rest. It was while she was sleeping, in the evening of February 7th, 1900, that he died. She never forgave herself, and it seems she was never fully able to let go of her grief. Elsie Maria Kingdon Leach was born on February 8, 1877, and she was just 1 day shy of her 23rd birthday on the day after her firstborn died. By all indications, she had a troubled childhood. She always maintained that she was born in Clifton, and it is true that she was born on the edge of this smart neighborhood, at 2 Berkeley Place. However, her family's home was on an inelegant street leading down the hill from Clifton to the docks along the River Avon at Hotwells. When she was 4 years old, her family was living at the bottom of this hill, in a small house fronting the poorhouse steps. The poorhouse itself was long gone, but the address, on a steep alleyway connecting Mardyke Wharf with Church Lane, was a marker of the family's hard times. Elsie's Bristol-born father, William Kingdon, and her Welsh-born mother, Elizabeth Morgan Kingdon, had 12 children, and they struggled to make ends meet. Her father was a shipwright who worked on the docks, building and maintaining ships, until he fell on hard times and went into the Stapleton workhouse as a pauper. In 1887, he died there at the age of 53. Elsie's mother was left to support 5 children between the ages of 3 and 12, including 10-year-old Elsie, by working as a laundress. Elsie's older sister, Alice Kingdon, was also working as a laundress, but in 1891 she too was declared a pauper and went into the workhouse at Barton Regis. This was very much against her will. She cried loudly at night, expressed suicidal thoughts, and protested against the cold by dropping hot coals down her garments, burning herself. A few weeks after her admission to the workhouse.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?